Before we start today's video, I'd like to say that 2 weeks ago my father died. Last week we held a rather bizarre funeral, as dictated by the circumstances we find ourselves in, to say goodbye to him. My father and I were never close, but when I was a young man, transitioning from a train set to a model railway, he built me some baseboards. That started the journey that I'm still on today, 50 odd years later. Thanks, Dad. Hello, and I hope that these troubled times find you well and keeping safe. We come to part 3 of the series on designing a model railway layout with this piece on conceptual layout design. Now that sounds quite highfalutin, but it's actually quite a simple theory. It's not brand new, it's just something that I've pulled together over the years from lots of ideas to give you kind of the building blocks to layout design. This video is going to be quite picture heavy, quite wordy, for which I apologise. Let's get into it and let's find out what conceptual layout design is all about. There are 3 basic shapes: the I shape, the O shape, and finally the P shape. Conceptual layout design is all about how we use these 3 building blocks in combinations. You can use any one of them more than once, and you don't have to use all 3. You can just use I's or just O's. Let's have a look at the basic shapes and the possibilities available when you put combinations together. Here is a basic I shape. Now for the moment, don't worry about what those boxes on the ends are. They can be stations or fiddly yards, it doesn't matter. Just think of them as nodes. So here is a basic I with 2 nodes. Of course, you can have another node in the middle that can be a station with storage at either end. The node in the middle could be a through station with the other nodes being a terminus or storage, or you could even have a terminus at each end. You can see that determining the shape does not dictate the eventual layout format. Combinations of I's could give you this sort of layout. Again, don't worry too much about what each of the nodes represent. The top example is a very common choice. Terminus to storage perhaps, with a short branch or dock line. The lower track plan shows a junction with 2 branches, similar to Yatton Junction on the Great Western Railway. This brings us to an important point. At this stage, the lines drawn here could represent a single branch, a double-track main line, or even a 4-track main line. They also have no loyalty to gauge. You could combine 2 I shapes with one as standard gauge and the other as narrow. This combination of three eye shapes is one of my favourite designs, the Z layout. Some years ago, I produced a full design based on this concept, depicting a main line from storage to a small city terminus across the top, a single track secondary cross-country line going top left to bottom right, running to a country market town, and a single track branch along the bottom heading down to the sea. You may recall from the earlier video that one of my prime requirements for the new layout was the possibility of making a journey, and here it is, travelling from somewhere into a city, down into the country, and finally down to the holiday cottage at the coast. A journey in a layout with appropriate trains taking me from start to finish. Here is the next basic shape, the O, the continuous run, the roundy-roundy. In this particular case, there are just two nodes, but of course, this isn't the only possibility. One could be storage, the other could be a station, or even a scenic section. Remember that Wolverhampton MRC's Stoke Summit layout didn't have any stations at all. It was storage and scenery, and yet it was a hugely successful layout. I want to talk briefly now about this particular style of O layout that has somewhat fallen out of favour. It was all the rage back in the 70s and 80s when N-gauge first emerged, and it became possible to fit a return loop onto a narrow board. So was born the Dogbone Layout. You can see that the central station looks more important than it actually is. If your track is single, then you have a double track station, but if you're using a double track main line, the central station becomes a four-track affair. This design is not without its limitations, of course. If you have single track and are using analog control, you can only run one train at a time. With more modern DCC technology, you can have any number of trains running around the circuit. And of course, to save space, you can bend the design around to put one loop above the other. The final basic shape is the P, and here we see it in its basic form as part of an out and back layout fed by a terminus. The first combination we are looking at is a blend of I and O shapes. This is a design that I've used on a number of occasions, and those of you familiar with my old Yarslow layout will recognise it. The circuit is the main line, and the I shape is the branch line. Here is that P shape again, with an I element added. Instead of all of the trains having to run back to the original terminus, some can peel off and visit the lower station, or maybe storage sidings. This gives you three routes for your trains, clockwise around the loop, anti-clockwise around the loop, or node to node, thus giving you extra increased operational possibility. Some combinations may not appear to be much use on their own, but may be useful for further development. This is an O and P combination. Actually, there are two P loops here. Trains travel around the circuit clockwise until they want to reverse when they use the line across the middle. Unfortunately, having started travelling anti-clockwise, there's little else they can do. That is, until you add an I element. Now we have a combination of I, O and P. A train can leave the terminus, travel around the loop to simulate distance, and then use the return loop to reverse its direction and gain access back to the terminus. Adding a second I element doubles the fun. Now my trains can run from one terminus to the other,
or from either terminus on an out and back route. A slightly different shade of green to the others I'm using today brings us on to storage. Storage is the key for most model railway layouts, so let's talk about it in terms of I, O and P shapes. This is simple I storage, a straightforward set of ladder sidings where trains come in and leave from the access track on the left-hand side. This is O storage, and the sort of arrangement very commonly used on continuous run layouts. Don't forget that this could also sit between two terminus stations. On a larger layout, such sidings can be used to delay trains, but we'll talk more about that when we look at actual layout designs. And finally, P storage, with as many loops around the return as you can manage. The big advantage here is that trains arrive and depart facing in the same direction. Now here's a thing. What if you were running double track into your storage area and you were using a P shape, something like this? Trains could run either way around the return loop, but there's actually no point. If you simplify your design to this, you end up with something just as effective, but it actually saves you all that approach point work. So there you go. We talked about I shapes and O shapes and P shapes, I shape and O shape and P shape storage. And we've looked at one or two small instances where we've put the combinations of those elements together to come up with some basic layout ideas. What I'm going to do in the next video is to take these basic shapes and build them up to give you two examples, one of a layout that I actually built and another one that I very nearly built, just to show you how you can use the conceptual layout design theory and turn it into practice. Until then, stay safe. See you soon.